Good morning, everybody, and welcome from Tshwane, South Africa. Today, we are joined here in studio as we talk about the future professional and Profmed in particular for their annual roadshow. Today, things are a little bit different, obviously, because of the state of the world. So here we are, beaming our broadcast and our waves to you all around the country. And normally we'd be able to see you in person, but here we have almost 300 of you already on the webinar. So welcome today. We've got a mixture of technology, we've got a mixture of live streams, we've got a mixture of pre-records from some of the foremost experts around the country. And for those of you who haven't been exposed to futureprofessional.profmed.coza, you may have missed out on some of the amazing conversations we've had with people across the country, from economists, from personal finance experts to entrepreneurs and even doctors, and how they've experienced these interesting times. Today, we're going to be covering the future professional and what the world looks like to the South African professional. We're going to look at the impact on the market, and we're going to look at the impact and the effects of COVID-19 and what that has done to the South African professional. So thank you for joining us today. There's a little comment and poll box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen where you can ask a question, and we'll respond later in our Q&A section on any of the speakers that are delivering today, as well as a poll so that we can get some insights from you, our viewers. We're so grateful to have you on the broadcast, members, brokers, etc. And it's going to be a fascinating experience that we're participating and we're involved in for the next hour or so. So come along, enjoy the ride. And first up to welcome us today is CEO and Principal Officer Craig Comrie.
Thank you, Mike. It's great. I can actually think of all the roadshows that we normally do and where you currently are seated. We certainly miss the Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Durban, Polokwane. We realize that this might be, you might feel as if you're missing out, but I can assure you what we've got planned for you today, you'll feel like you're right in the middle of it and involved with Profmed like no other year before. This year we celebrate a few things, and at the end of 2018 and 19, the real tough economic pressures that existed at the time, we thought, well, what do we do for a 2020? And now this is pre-COVID, and so we very quickly realized that people need a little bit more inspiration, a little bit more encouragement, and we need to share the magnificent stories of the members that we have within Profmed. And so we initiated the #BelieveIn campaign. And so I hope you've been following some of those magnificent testimonials, not just about who Profmed is, it really is about who the Profmed member is. And so I want to just share with you the journey from the successes of the past into what we see as the future of Profmed. So what we are going to talk about is just a little bit about what we've learned over the last 6 to 8 months. I mean, who could have imagined the COVID pandemic would make such a huge difference in our lives? I think in terms of the history, in terms of the time of our lives in history, we are going to be telling our grandchildren, our future generations, that we did more than just buy additional toilet paper and other things. We are actually in a space where we are making history in terms of surviving and growing our economy and our businesses in terms of South Africa and of Profmed. So I want to chat a little bit about who our professionals are. So we covered, and over the last few months, we've actually spoken about the Future Profmed or Professional series in terms of the podcasts. And the first thing that I realized when reflecting on those that we've hosted is that the workplace or the career or even the profession our members find themselves in has changed so remarkably, even over the last 6 months. And if we look back over the last 3 or 4 years, professionals are doing things differently. Accountants are becoming futurists, economists are really delving into how to solve problems in a very innovative and special way. Some of the solutions or some of the problems that we've actually had aren't that different 2 years ago, but it's how we actually solving them that has changed. And so the pressures on professionals and their families has changed too. The fact that digital dominates our lives actually means that we have to find different ways to connect, that we have to actually approach how we work a little differently. Now, I think of my own profession, and I come from that accounting and auditing background, but certainly today, a single accountant can do what I used to do with a team of 10. In about 3 months, they can do within a minute. And so we've seen how the digital and the advancement in technology actually enables professionals to magnify their contributions to their profession, also their contributions to South Africa and to SA. And so we see the game changes really emerging in terms of what we can do. And so for Profmed, it has been a relook at changing with what we see professionals doing and making sure at every step of the way we're changing in a way to actually look after them and their other concern, their families. So we are going to share with you some of the enhancements of what we've changed, but one of the first things we've decided to change is just the way we look. And so I'll introduce you to the future Profmed.
Today, we write the world of tomorrow. Leveraging 60 years of experience while spearheading the new. A delicate dance of wisdom and foresight, we are paving and pioneering the road that lies ahead. Sharing a vision, an entrepreneurial spirit, and solutionist way of life. Our purpose is defined in the professionals we serve. An intelligent partner when you need us most. Investing time to design, build, and create value. We meet at the intersection of innovation and science, creativity and analytics. Together, we are that collective of professionals who dream, who challenge the norms and achieve the extraordinary. So let's keep leading the way, expanding our journey, lighting the path, with the peace of mind that your well-being is covered by a professional just like you, who shares your values, your investment, and your commitment to deliver every day with tomorrow imagined. We are Profmed, intelligent medical aid for professionals.
What a great brand ad, and I hope you saw all the changes that we're making. I think you've grown accustomed to the P of the old blue brand and the old logo, but now we move to what I see as the E, or the me, in Profmed. And so I want to just cover a little bit about what that E means to us, and going forward it'll share with you some of the foundational principles on which that E actually is talking to. So the first part is about experience. So the top of the E is all about the experience that we bring together as a collective within a medical scheme, all those professionals from different backgrounds and careers. We certainly have seen the advent of animators and geneticists come through, those that frame artificial intelligence. These are people from different backgrounds, and they bring all their talents into one space, which then becomes Profmed. And so we acknowledge those differences. In terms of the middle of the E is human. So the human part means that we respect and we understand that there's a diverse grouping of people from different ethnicities and belief systems that also come together. We also realize that with the advancements of digital platforms, that we still need to remain human in how we engage with the Profmed membership. And so it is a reminder that the touch and the real care is a basis of which our success is based on. And the last one is the values that we always hold true. The fact that we remain loyal, we try and build as much trust with our members, and for that we believe it provides the foundation for a better South Africa, and we enable those professionals who receive care through the funding of the medical scheme to actually make a real difference in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Craig. I think it's an incredible evolution in terms of focusing on the me and the person that is our members. And I think especially if we tap into the human nature and the human aspect of the brand, that's the one thing that Profmed has continued to leverage and to evolve over those 60 years. The average business on the S&P 500 is only 18 years old nowadays. So if you think of a brand like Profmed, you can imagine all of the changes that it has experienced in its world and in the world of its members and its target market over the past 60 years. And I think it's a real testament to the resilience of this brand and how it's continued to adapt to market conditions. Up next, we're going to meet Musa Kalenga. Musa Kalenga was one of my guests on the recent Future Professional podcast. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to that yet, futureprofessional.profmed.coza. It was a fascinating discussion around the intersection between analytics, humanity, and the intersection of creativity thereof. Musa wasn't able to join us today live, so we're going to be streaming a pre-record of his presentation where he's going to take us through some of his interesting elements as well as his growth analogy. So Musa, CEO of Bridge Labs, take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Mike, and I'm really keen to be here to chat about something that I think is super important to everybody that is on this call. I think first and foremost, the last 100 days have been absolutely crazy, not for me, not for you, but for everyone on the planet. And as a professional that's been looking to survive, we've gone from everything from shock to denial, right to integration, where we're trying to figure out how to move forward in the world that has changed fundamentally and forever. And so I'm going to be talking to you about what that means, the API humanity effectively being a way that we think about how we show up as professionals going forward and how we create value in the organizations that we're in. One important thing that I need to start with is that the set of rules I'm going to give you are not necessarily a cheat sheet. It's not a solve. In fact, the whole idea is to get you to ask more questions, because the better the questions we ask, the better solutions that we get. And so a great place to start is actually to reflect on the past. Because one of the key things that we do is in understanding the future, a good starting point is to figure out what happened and what got us there. And so I'll do a little bit of a throwback to 1886, where the superpowers of Europe got together and effectively started plotting the biggest takeover from an economic perspective to date in that point in history. What happened at the Berlin Convention effectively is that the superpowers got together and they looked at a map and they effectively divvied up what was to be the continental colonization of Africa. And so the interesting thing about that is, if we figure about what they did, is effectively they started figuring out how they were going to come into Africa and start to create value not only for themselves, but for generations to come. If you use that as a peg in time, one of the interesting things that comes up is that 1886 created effectively almost 200 years of a gap of economic development. The challenge that we all have as professionals and as value creators is, how do we close a 200-year gap in, what I put it to you, just 10 years? And this 10-year period is really important because we ultimately all have to play our part. And being able to respond to 1886 in a way that makes absolute sense means even professionals have to think about value in a fundamentally different way. And so the conversation today will give you three very key things to understand. The first thing is to pretty much locate yourself in the challenge that we have and think about the role of technology, to think about the role of humanity, and to think about the role that we're going to have as a self-leadership starting point. When we understand how we lead ourselves, we're also able to figure out how we can use things like technology to be able to position ourselves as professionals to get the best outcome in what is completely uncertain of a future. The last thing is we need to figure out the role of transformation. Diversity becomes increasingly important as we build out new companies, new businesses, and potentially even new business models to try and make us fit for purpose, but also to capture the value that Africa latently has within its economy. So let's start with the role of self-leadership. A reflective process that we all should be going through is really looking at the mirror and assessing our strengths, our weaknesses, and also being able to create specific plans to address those kind of things. So a very simple model to look at when you think about it is a way that you disrupt yourself. There are two levers which you have to pull on. The first lever is understanding what your level of implementation agility is. And this is quite simple. It's how do you take new information, and how do you use that information to change your standard of productivity and delivery. That relates to the output that you have as a professional in relation to the problems that you're solving in the workplace. The second lever you have to pull on is called the mental resolve. And this one also seems a little bit random, but it's important. How well have you made peace with the fact that the world has changed forever? Whether we like it or not, there are still some people that are sitting there hoping that things will go back to normal. And we all throw around the word new normal because it's what it is, but it has to be embraced for you to get the value as a working and a young professional. The other thing we need to do is we plot those two axes and we start to create these 4 simple quadrants. The first is when you have a high implementation agility, but you have a low mental resolve, you tend to be in the quadrant of nostalgia. And I call this the rocking chair. It's quite simple. You're sitting there and you're doing a lot of things and you're ticking all the boxes, but you're actually not able to realize that the future has changed forever. And so you sit in your nostalgic point of view and you're hoping secretly that things will just go back to the way they used to be. The second quadrant that we see is called stagnation. This is typically where you have a low implementation agility and you've got a low mental resolve, effectively meaning you haven't made peace with the fact that the world is going to be different. The challenge with that quadrant is you effectively create a pity party. So you get everybody around you to complain about the same things and you ultimately keep each other very comfortable in your own misery. You're not able to move past that and therefore you stagnate. The third quadrant is literally the compliant. Now the compliant are interesting because they've got a high mental resolve but a low implementation agility. What that means is ultimately they've made peace with the fact that the world is different, but they may be stuck in a team, in a business or a context that's so calcified that they can't change stuff, they can't move quickly, they can't be lean and they can't be nimble. It's a frustrating place to be, but is the reality of many professionals out there. The fourth quadrant, which is interesting, is this place of reinvention, where you can start to embrace the future and ultimately thrive in a phenomenal and a very different way. And to disrupt yourself looking in the mirror, using this model, is a very key starting point for you to locate yourself on the journey to making a success, not only of your career, but of the economy that we're in. Another important view that we need to take on the world is understanding where we are from a technology perspective. And although I don't like using the word disruption, I think it's a little gift from the age of augmentation that we have to appreciate for a second. For you to fully grasp what it means, you have to understand the 3 stages of technology that impact you as a professional in the world that we live in. The first stage is quite simple. Back in the day, we had passive technology. The best reference is if you're a Netflix watcher like myself and you follow the Roman Empire, the story of the gladiator was one where you had to fight to get your freedom, or ultimately you died. Those are the 2 options that you had. But if you fought and you won, you got etched into history. And that process was someone taking a block of stone, a chisel and a hammer, and literally forcing the will of the human into the stone to create what is a very fancy ID photo and those regal pictures that we've seen of these Roman emperors and gladiators. Back in the day, this was a very sophisticated form of technology. But I put it to you, it was very rudimentary in our context because the will of the human had to be forced into the stone to be able to create the statue. The world evolved and things moved on. We got to this era of generative technology, and generative technology is somewhat different. It's actually the intersection of the best of the human and the best of the computer. Think about the first mouse, where you could slide this little device over a mouse pad and you could create a Word document, or a PowerPoint, or a smiley face on Paint. This is now generative because the human and the computer got together and produced the best of both. The phase that we're in currently is intuitive technology, a fascinating but exciting phase of technology. Effectively, what it means is that there's an intersection point between the data that is available in the world, and it's going up and to the right, as well as the computing power that is available to us to use that data to create and make decisions. I mean, you'll remember the first time you tried to type an email on Gmail and it suggested a response for you. It was a bit freaky, but all that is Gmail having read enough of your emails, understanding how you phrase, how you start sentences, and how you close sentences, and simply recommending a solution. Intuitive technology. And so as a young professional, understand what opportunities come as a result of that. Data science, analytics, being able to correlate unrelated things. Those are all really important because that's where services and products are going to come from. The second thing is we have to appreciate the role of technology. And a very quick pause moment allows us to be able to look at 2 intersecting graphs. The first graph is what I refer to as the Human Development Index. Now this number is crunched together by many clever people across the world, and what they do is they put it on a graph and they try and see what the state of wellness in different parts of the world is. As you can see, Latin America is the top, and unfortunately right at the bottom is Sub-Sahara Africa. What this tells you is that since 1990, although we see that the state of wellness is getting better, it is still lowest in our continent. What this means, unfortunately, is that we've got a lot more work to do to change the state of human development in Africa. Now, the second thing you notice is that the graphs are sloping up and to the right. Now, any mathematician or any bright person would know that that means incremental change. It means that we're progressing, but only ever so slightly. The second graph I'll show you is one that is vastly different. This is the acceleration of technology curve. What you'll see is that when you created the printing press right through to 3D printing, the curve accelerates. It's called the J curve. Right? Anyone who's got a startup and your revenue looks like this, someone's going to give you a lot of money. But effectively, what this curve is all about, it's about acceleration. It's about understanding how technology has gotten better and better over time. And this curve is quite exciting. The challenge is when you overlay one with the other, a really disturbing trend starts to emerge. The first thing you'll notice is that we got incremental growth from a human development perspective, but we got exponential growth from a technology perspective. The gap that creates is ultimately what we have to solve for as professionals and value creators. How is it possible that we're sending people to the moon, but we can't feed people on Earth? And so that's the provocation that we all have to take up arms to try and solve, and we need to create services, solutions, and products to address. Here's a quick video that helps you to understand some businesses that are grasping this and creating fantastic solutions as a result.
Rwanda is known as the land of 1,000 hills.
It is a very difficult country in terms of topography, and many areas are hard to reach.
Traversing that terrain to get to a rural village can take hours, even though it's a very short distance.
Today, if a mother is giving birth and suffers from postpartum hemorrhaging, her life is dependent on getting a blood transfusion.
There are many different types of blood types. They have a limited shelf life. And the challenge is when you need blood, you need it immediately. But it is unpredictable which geography that will occur in.
Hospitals that are in more remote areas can have a very hard time getting enough reliably supplied blood.
The time to order and get the supplies by truck is just too late.
There's no way that we can overcome the time that it takes to get anywhere during the rainy season. And people would say, okay, during the rainy season, we're just not going to make it.
The best case scenario, it would take at least 4 hours. But with Zipline, we are looking at cutting that 4 hours to something like 15 minutes.
It is a team of Rwandese who came together with Zipline to groom the project and to make it happen in Rwanda.
Their ultimate vision is to put each and every one of those 11 million citizens within a 15 to 35-minute delivery of any essential medical product that they could need. And that's a revolutionary idea for any country in the world.
The use of drones to deliver life-saving medical products can overcome the lack of road infrastructure. We need to let our imagination soar.
When you have a commodity, rare in supply, that might be an unusual blood type or something like a rabies vaccine, and you need it immediately, the idea that we could use a drone to be able to deliver this to the country is absolutely brilliant. There's nothing else that could do that in that way.
It is like we will no longer go around hills, but we fly over the hills.
We've pulled together a team from places like Boeing, SpaceX, Google, Lockheed Martin.
And it's an honor for Zipline to partner with the government of Rwanda.
We place a hub next to an existing medical warehouse, and it instantly enables that warehouse to make hundreds of deliveries per day to any location within range.
The doctor sends us their order by text, by phone call, whatever's convenient.
Somebody identifies the need and then prepares the package, puts it on a drone.
Then we take that vehicle and we put it through pre-flight tests. It's launched, it flies automatically out to the clinic.
The path has been already calculated, it's in the computer.
And then they'll receive a text message saying, Zip is 2 minutes away, please walk outside.
It drops the packet, somebody goes and collects it.
It turns around, it flies home, and then we get it ready for the next delivery.
Our service not only makes it possible, but also affordable for countries to deliver reliable access to essential medicines for all of their citizens.
What we are looking forward to see here is saving lives.
This isn't a small step forward. This is a transformational change to how we provide medical care to people across the world.
So what you'll see from that video is it's a phenomenal illustration of how we as professionals have to lift as we rise. We face many problems on our continent, and if we're not fundamentally solving for that, we're not preserving a market, an economy, and a community for tomorrow. The third thing we have to consider is the role of transformation. And transformation broadly is all about inclusion. Technology businesses are trying to solve this, many untransformed industries are trying to address this, and many boardrooms in different parts of the world are trying to get this thing right. The importance of transformation is that according to research that's been conducted, it's one of the key things that drives high-performing teams that are able to deliver on solving more and more complex problems. And so when we consider that diversity trumps the ability to be productive, we have to think really critically about how we're assembling people to solve problems that we don't even know we have today. And so diversity is a key way that management teams as well as professionals can add to their arsenal, which organically helps them to try and drive high performance, but also creates a different conversation around the boardroom table. It's also important to consider that when we think about transformation, there are very key principles that drive high-performing teams that are diverse in nature. The first thing we need to understand is that there's a huge form of dependability that is driven by highly diverse teams that happen to be working together. Dependability ultimately means that people are quite clear on the delivery that's required as well as expectations that are formed. It's also important that there's structure and clarity when you're working in high-performing and extremely diverse teams. What that effectively means is that people are well-orientated and have got a very high degree of comfort to be able to solve problems and achieve goals within that group. The other thing we know about high-performing teams is that those teams derive a lot of meaning from the work that they do. They come to work not only to tick a box, but to believe that they're fundamentally contributing to something meaningful that aligns with their passion and the purpose that they believe they have. We also know that from a high-performing team's perspective, impact is something that is super close to their hearts. I remember when I worked for an amazing blue organization called Facebook, we focused a lot on impact because impact ultimately was the thing that brought us together. The ability to connect over 1 billion people in a way that was organic was something that for us meant that we actually could connect one-to-one in a world that was becoming increasingly disconnected. And so the last thing we need to be aware of about high-performing teams is that there's a high degree of psychological safety. And so when you've got a diverse team of people solving really amazing problems, it's important that people feel they can bring the best of themselves to the table, but they'll be heard and that they'll be understood. And so in the complex world that we live in, this creates an amazing tapestry for us to think about human beings, professionals, and value creators as conduits to informations and solutions. So what the API Humanity is about is that if you place yourself as a professional in the center of this crazy connected world, how is it that you can design and create new solutions? How is it that you can play a role in identifying new problems and new opportunities? And in so doing, we start to figure out a way to close the gap on the economic challenge that we have as a continent and as a country. The last check I did, the data that was coming out of the World Health Organization was a bit concerning. Africa contributes about 17% to global world population, but only 3% to world GDP. Now that gap in itself is something that we should all be worried about. And given what we've gone through COVID, South Africa's economy is on a rickety road to try and recover. And so the role of professionals becomes increasingly more important. The world that we're moving into is actually becoming more augmented. And so as a professional, it's not only exciting, but it allows you to be able to locate yourself in a place where things will be fundamentally different. I want to show you a video that paints a really different picture of tomorrow, but helps you to understand where things could ultimately go.
Our goal is to build intelligent machines to help people in their daily lives. What makes us intelligent is our ability to learn. And this is what we're trying to reproduce in machines. And to some extent, we get inspiration from biology. What we can do with current technology is build networks of simulated neurons on the order of magnitude of the brain of a mouse, let's say. So the way we train our machine, we show a bunch of images of, say, breeds of dogs, and for each image we tell it what it is.
We want the machine to be able to learn to perform the tasks. The more we show them examples, the better they get.
And what's very interesting is that after a while it can do this with a new dog it's never seen before. It's able to exhibit superhuman performance on a particular task. So how can we help people's life with this?
Friends 937. Newsfeed. Lindsay Russell updated her cover photo yesterday at 10:29 p.m. This image may contain outdoor, cloud, foliage, flat, tree. This image may contain 6 people, child, close up, like. 1 or more people. Jewelry. Smiling. 19 likes. 3 comments like.
Now I can see the picture in my head. Like, yeah, you shouldn't have been that close up. Like, now I can say it.
Oh, I love it. You have no idea. This is amazing.
That whole saying of pictures being worth 1,000 words, I think it's true, but unless you have somebody to describe it to you, even having like 3 words just helps flesh out all the details that I can't see.
I feel like I can fit in. If there's more I can do.
I can just call my mom like, yay, I seen your picture. And she'll be like, what? She was like, how you see it? Because my phone read it to me. It's new. And I'm going to mess with my mother head so much.
In the future, we'll be able to give a complete description of the image.
The 2 people happy? Are they sad? Are they holding hands with one another? It's this kind of comment that a human would make.
We have systems in the lab that are able to do this, and they will be deployed over the next few years. Artificial intelligence systems are going to be an extension of our brains, the same way cars are an extension of our legs. They're not going to replace us, they're going to amplify everything we do, augmenting your memory, giving you instant knowledge, and they're going to allow us to concentrate on doing things that are properly human.
So watching that video could ultimately freak you out or get you super excited. The one thing that it does do for sure is it positions us to be able to take advantage of the fact that the next 10 years, Africa could actually leapfrog the rest of the world. If you remember the 200-year gap which we spoke about, it actually puts us in a position where if we apply the basics of being able to connect as human beings, the best of technology, and a future view of the world, we can actually get to a point where South Africa and the rest of the continent become a superpower. Everybody else sees it, the question is, do we? And if we do see it, what plan do we have? So here are very 6 easy steps for you to follow and for you to think about as we try and grow not only as a professional, but as you try and understand how you add value in the world of tomorrow. The first thing is figure out how you can get more creative within your spaces and within the world that you live in. Creativity is one of the key things that differentiates professionals of the future, but also is the one thing that makes humans more human than computers. The second thing we need to do is start to relearn the basics. There's going to be an increased focus on mastery, and mastery becomes really important in the world of tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of people that are generalists, and there's going to be a high premium placed on people that are masters of what they do. So learning the basics and becoming really good at that becomes super important. The next thing we need to focus on is understanding how to tackle complexity. And complexity in itself is allowing us to be able to focus on where impact lies, and also for us to be able to connect unrelated dots. We also need to spend a lot of time treating each other extremely well. Diversity is something that we have to embrace, but more importantly, empathy in the markets that we serve, the people that we work with, and the teams that we are in. And last but not least, we need to have metrics. We need to obsess with being able to quantify where we're at and where we're going. If we don't do this, ultimately the challenge is that we lose our way. There's a lot of things happening all the time, every time. And for professionals of the future, they make sure that they can measure that as they go along. And the last thing that we need to do is ensure that we're using our networks, not only to connect, but to leverage them for commercial value. It's important that we continue to make sure that we're connecting as human beings. And the irony is that in this age of technology, that becomes increasingly more important. And so I wish you all the best on this journey as professionals that are looking to create value, but also as citizens of the continent and citizens of South Africa. Good luck.
I always love listening to Moose's talks, and especially the growth elements, because I think it's something that's so relevant for all of us in these interesting times. 2020 always talks about clarity and vision and perfect vision, and I think so many of us have been caught in a little bit of paralysis of pandemic and not knowing where to next. But I think there's also the flip side of that, where we've looked at ways in which we can really hone in on something that we can pivot to or we can upgrade to and change our lives or mold and be malleable. And I think it speaks to that human condition inspiration. And today is all about humanity. And I think it's great to also see the participation in the polls on the bottom right hand of your screen, the questions. I see there's a question from Lisa as well as Pete talking specifically to top brokers and the NHI, some really important discussion points. Hendrik will talk about the top brokers in particular when he gives his presentation. But before we get into that, keep letting us know what you feel about the new brand look and feel, the new positioning, whether you'd love to have a real-life webinar or a roadshow, or if you'd prefer to have this virtual kind of webinar that we're having today. It's been incredible to see 450 plus of you join us so far, so welcome, and thank you for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. So without further ado, we're going to move on to a really fascinating and insightful conversation with a gentleman who couldn't be here today, so this was a pre-record, Christoph Rath. He's an actuary, and we know for all of those actuaries out there, they love building models and they love looking at statistics. And you'll see in the next few minutes when he delves into some really interesting anomalies around the impact of COVID-19 on the professional and what that means to you and your customers out there. So without further ado, Christoph, take it away.
I also want to thank Profmed for the invitation to present at your product launch. It's a real pity I can't attend in person, not only because I would like to be at the launch, but also because the topic that I'm speaking about changes more or less on a daily basis. And we are recording this on the 14th of September, and it's quite conceivable that between the recording and the launch date, some as yet unknown feature of COVID or lockdown might creep up upon us. But I certainly do hope this will still be relevant and interesting to all of you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID and medical schemes, but also with a particular focus on Profmed. So perhaps first, just to emphasize, why are people so concerned about COVID? And the reason is that it is both sufficiently contagious and sufficiently deadly, but not so deadly that it would kill its host instantaneously. It's kind of at the sweet spot of contagiousness and mortality that allows it to become quite a significant feature in our everyday lives. And yet you can see where seasonal flu sits compared to COVID, where we think it is, because we don't know in particular where it is yet, and see that it's a very different disease from any of the others that I have on this slide. Bird flu or avian flu and Ebola, for instance, are so deadly that they actually cannot spread sufficiently to make a significant impact, because people who get infected do not survive for a long time. But when you get COVID, you survive long enough to impact the people around you. So South Africa has had a really, really tough wave of COVID. You just cast your eye on this, and this was updated as at the time we're making this recording. Just cast your eye across the globe, you'll see that we are one of the darkest countries in this scale. And that's because per million people, and there are very few countries who had it worse than we had. The United States did, Brazil did, and a number of countries like Spain also had a really, really tough first wave. But South Africa did not have it easy. One way perhaps to show how to think about these numbers is to look at one of the many dashboards out there that we can look at on a daily basis. I'll refer you to a bloke on Twitter that might be particularly useful to follow. His name is, Twitter handle at least, is Shugan2503. His surname is Naidu, Shugan Naidu. And if you follow him on Twitter, you'll see a dashboard like this tweeted every morning. There are many other dashboards to look at, but this one is particularly useful. And you'll see if we go back 2 months, at the 7th of July, maybe that's 3 months ago, we had about 110,000 active cases in the country. And at that stage, we saw 10,000 new cases every day and about 4,000 recoveries every day. Now, if we fast forward to the 21st of July, we got to the peak of the pandemic in South Africa. At this stage, you'll see that the number of new infections was equal to the number of recoveries on that day. So as you can imagine, the moment your recoveries become equal to your new cases, the total number of cases in COVID starts to stabilize. And South Africa stabilized at 165,000 cases, which, by the way, is significantly more than Italy had. Italy, and all of us in February and March looked with horror at our TV screens when we saw that footage of mass graves being dug, of hospitals wheeling corpses out of the front door, quite literally. And I think it's important to just briefly reflect on the fact that we had about 50% more cases than Italy in South Africa, and yet we did not hit that saturation threshold that Italy saw, that caused its healthcare system to be unable to cope with COVID. And to a large degree, you'll see I'll argue that the lockdown, the hated lockdown that we had to go through in South Africa, was perhaps the reason for us being able to cope with COVID. If I can fast forward to today, you'll notice that we're now down to 56,000 cases. That's 100,000 cases down from the peak of the epidemic in South Africa, which was about 165,000 cases. And even today, you'll see, at the day that I'm recording this, that we had 1,000 new infections and 1,400 new recoveries, so a net gain of about 400 people. So certainly South Africa, as we go into summer, is on the downward trend right now. Here we are in relation to a number of countries. I've bold-faced South Africa on the slide, so you can see quite clearly where we peaked and how we're going down. But a little bit more interesting, and I'll reflect on that later, is these second waves that we start to see in some countries. New Zealand might have had a second wave. South Korea might have had a second wave. And part of what I would like to talk about today is, why do countries have such different experiences? And why do some countries have second waves and others do not have second waves? And what should we expect in South Africa? I think one observation we can make is that similar neighbouring regions have similar performance, with some exceptions. But in Europe, Spain, UK, and Italy had the highest deaths per million. If we also look towards the Americas, North and South America and Brazil had similar deaths per million. If we look at the Nordic countries, with the exception of Sweden, which had a really different policy response to the others, we also saw similar experience. And Asian countries had the lowest experience. We speculate that it might be because of SARS, because these are countries who were previously exposed to a similar pandemic and who were more ready as a consequence to fight or respond as a nation to COVID. Now, we did some interesting research to look at mobility in South Africa. This comes from the Google Mobility Index. So Google publishes information where we can see where people are. And unsurprisingly, just after the lockdown was announced on 30 March, South Africans were mainly found in their residences. We had a 4,000% increase in the number of people sitting in their residences compared to where they normally would be. And similarly, if you look at the graph, you'll see how grocery parks, retail, transit stations, workplaces, offices were much lower. And then you'll see, as we went to level 4, level 3, and now level 2, the mobility of South Africans have increased. What's interesting, though, is that to some degree, this was a decision by population to progressively, I guess, give heed the strictness and severity of the lockdown measures less and less closely. So initially, if we look again at the mobility index, which I'm showing in purple now, and we compare that to the lockdown severity, which is measured using an index used by the WHO, you'll notice that South Africa's lockdown was quite strict and was only marginally lifted over time. But the population decided to start moving again, almost out of its own accord. There's some degree of fatigue, perhaps, saying that people get tired of sticking to lockdown regulations and just started to resume their normal lives. And this was, I guess, quite a common phenomenon across many countries that we're looking at. The fact that we've reached our peak is most likely due to some form of herd immunity being reached. And I'll try to show you that even though the official number of people infected is about 600,000, we think it's north of 12 million South Africans that had COVID, but perhaps just didn't have symptoms. Now, we're quite worried today about the possibility of second waves, as I've indicated before. Singapore is showing a second wave. Israel is showing a second wave. In fact, Israel went into its second lockdown just 2 days ago, before I recorded this. Singapore opened its borders, and that combined with outbreaks in more densely populated immigrant areas in Singapore seemed to have caused a second wave. And New Zealand and Australia, who never really had a really tough first wave, also show signs of a second wave. And I think one of the questions on everyone's lips at the moment is whether South Africa should expect another year of COVID in 2021. It's also an important question for Profmed when it tries to budget for next year. Now, here's a picture of Spain, where we can see what happened in Spain in the same way that I showed you the South African lockdown. So Spain had a really bad first wave, just like we did here. But we can see when the numbers started picking up again, the government increased lockdown measures, but that time the population did not respond. I spoke just now about the fatigue that we see sometimes when the population doesn't want to respond to lockdown. So with a second wave, it doesn't look as if the government lockdown measures the second time had any impact on government's on the population's compliance to lockdown regulations. Having said that, the good news of some of the second waves that we see, such as the Spain second wave, is that even though there is a sharp increase in cases recently towards the end of July and into August, it does not appear that the second wave that they are showing is accompanied by a similar number of hospitalizations and, more importantly, by a similar number of deaths. So the deaths are shown here in red and upside down. And you'll notice that even though there are many people getting affected the second way around, that not many people are dying as a result. And we're not yet completely sure why this is, but it does seem to be perhaps a silver lining to the extent that second waves will become part of our lives going forward. I think South Africa certainly has the benefit of timing. And that's to say that as we go into summer now, the Northern Hemisphere is going into winter, and we can look north. We can learn in October, November, December, as things get hotter here and cooler in the Northern Hemisphere. And we know the COVID virus likes cool weather. We will learn a lot during the next few months as to what to expect in 2021, and perhaps the Northern Hemisphere will give us a short movie trailer preview of what 2021 will look like for South Africa. I want to move on to the medical scheme experience, quickly give you a sense. First, we know that if you have any comorbidities or additional sicknesses, you are much more prone to die as a result of COVID. I list a number of conditions on the right-hand side. So if we look at people with comorbidities, those are the kinds of conditions that we see on the right-hand side of my slide. People with cancer, but also specifically and most prominently people with diabetes, or with high blood pressure, with hypertension, you are certainly at a much higher risk of dying if you are diagnosed with COVID. You'll see on the slide, if you're 65 years or older, and if you have any of the conditions listed on the right-hand side, then your chances of dying is about 20%, which is about 1 out of 5. Now, really interesting what we saw in South Africa during this year is that people started changing the way they use healthcare since the lockdown was announced. Now, we saw, and I'll show you just in 1 or 2 slides now, that people stopped going to GPs, people stopped going to hospitals when lockdown started, but we also saw that consumers changed the way they choose to approach healthcare. Quite fascinating in our industry is this observation that fewer people decided to opt for C-sections compared to before COVID. And this might have been driven by fear. It might have been driven by consumers saying, look, a hospital is a dangerous place right now, and I'd prefer not to spend too much time in a hospital if I can avoid it. Understandably, of course, elective procedures such as hip replacements and cataracts dropped very significantly in April because they were actually prohibited by regulations. But even after April, when lockdown ceased, when lockdown lifted a little bit and we were allowed to do elective procedures again, we can see that the number of elective procedures never returned to historic levels. This is something that concerns schemes like Profmed, because we know there are many people who needed hip replacements, joint replacements, cataracts, who did not go to get those. And to some degree, medical schemes are bracing themselves for the cost of these when people start catching up in procedures that were perhaps foregone or bypassed during 2020. If we look at hospitalization, we can see that the number of hospital admissions reduced significantly, more than I've seen in my entire career of working with medical schemes, about a 50% reduction from March into April, but still very low numbers also in May and June. And that's interesting because we also saw not only surgery, but also infectious diseases like pneumonia, gastroenteritis were significantly lower. And what we're thinking is that over and above the fact that people might just be really scared to go to hospital at the moment, I think what we're also seeing is that the lockdown measures prevented all infected diseases from spreading, which is to say pneumonia or gastroenteritis also can't spread. So if you sanitize and isolate and social distance and wear masks, you actually prevent all infectious diseases from spreading, not just COVID. On the right-hand side, I just show the average cost of a COVID admission is about 20 or 30% higher than the average cost of a normal hospital admission. But it's reducing, and that's comforting. I think it's symptomatic of the fact that people are starting, that hospitals and doctors are starting to understand the treatment of COVID better over time. So far this year, if you look at the first 6 months at least, the July data here is not yet fully developed, but we can see that this COVID experience that medical schemes had to pay for so far was actually a tiny sliver compared to the total hospital experience. So we expect some kind of a bounce back at some stage because people have been neglecting their healthcare, people have been postponing their healthcare, and that's part of what the medical schemes are grappling with in South Africa at the moment. So let me speak in general about what we're uncertain about, and there's still a lot of COVID that we don't know, that we just don't understand. We know a little bit, and if I say we know it, I can say that we can say it with certainty. We know mortality rates are age-dependent and comorbidity-dependent, and we know that children are probably a little bit less susceptible to getting COVID. But there's such a long list, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can just scan it, things that we're not sure of yet. There are many theories, there are many conspiracy theories. It seems to be more or less certain now that you probably can't get COVID twice, although there still are isolated incidents, which we think might be results of false positive or false negative results. But there are a lot of questions remaining. Doctors are not even in agreement as to whether we should talk about COVID as a respiratory or a vascular disease. Maybe a fascinating case study to impress on you just how uncertain things are. Let's look at the Diamond Princess, the cruise ship all of us read about in March and April, where COVID broke out and the entire cruise ship was isolated, which must have been horrible for all of the passengers. But when all was said and done, and when all passengers were tested, only 20% of passengers were actually infected by COVID, which is fascinating. We can compare that perhaps to the Marion Correctional Institute in Ohio, the USA, a jail where COVID broke out amongst the inmates. And when all was said and done over there, 80% of people were infected. Now, why the big difference? And the short answer is we're not sure. There are some speculative explanations, like maybe it was possible to self-isolate better in the cruise ship, but there's still a lot that we need to learn about this disease that we don't know. Now, I want to briefly reflect on the financial impact of medical schemes before I wrap up. So intuitively, all of us want to think about claims. So there is a claims impact, and medical schemes need to pay for testing and for hospitalization, but there are other ways that COVID is also impacting on medical schemes. One is assistance. So let's say the desire to give low contribution increases to members. And finally, the economic impact, and that could be both job losses and it could be reserves. So if I can paint the entire picture, I can perhaps talk about, from a claims perspective, a scheme like Profmed saw very, very high levels of testing. I'll show this to you on the next slide. We also saw hospitalization and other claims, but we've also seen the counterbalancing effect of reduced healthcare utilization. As I said, many people chose not to go to the doctor. But going forward, schemes are trying to put measures in place to keep contribution increases lower than they would ordinarily be, and that would come at a cost to medical schemes. Schemes are also accommodating more buy-downs or downgrades, perhaps from an option like ProSecure to an option like Proactive, and being more lenient in allowing people to buy down in the middle of the year to accommodate members. And finally, medical schemes are invested in equities, and to the extent that the markets crash, the reserves of medical schemes are also negatively impacted. Medical schemes are also concerned about job losses and economic damage, and the possibility that in the future, perhaps in 2021, more healthy people would choose to resign from medical schemes, leaving behind an unhealthier pool, which will be hard for medical schemes to deal with. So to conclude, I think it's important to say that there are many uncertainties remaining, although we learn more about COVID and lockdown on a regular basis, almost on a daily basis. One of the uncertainties we still face is the possibility of a second wave. We're still not sure what future testing costs could come at. It costs about 850 rands for a COVID test at the moment, and medical schemes often have to pay for those tests. The cost of future treatments that might emerge at any point in time that medical schemes would be obligated to pay for and that medical schemes would want to pay for. And somewhere in the future also medical schemes will have to shoulder the cost of a vaccine. We have no idea what that vaccine will cost even when it is ready. Counterbalance to this threat, to these future uncertainties is the desire of medical schemes to keep contribution increases as low as possible. Profmed's board very, very carefully had to deliberate as to what the appropriate balance is between keeping contribution increases low while preparing the scheme for the uncertainty that lies ahead. To keep contribution increases low, you could do it just by using scheme reserves. You could also do it just by paying doctors and hospitals less. You could also do it just by cutting benefits quite dramatically. And different medical schemes are all thinking about all three of these in different ways at the moment. I think the one overarching comment I can make about Profmed is that Profmed's reserves are very healthy, in the region of 40% reserves, which means that Profmed has a strong enough balance sheet to shoulder a lot of the uncertainties that we're seeing here. And that even though we still don't know exactly how 2021 will play out, whether we'll see a second wave, whether COVID costs will increase, whether people will catch up with healthcare that they forgot in 2020, whether healthier people will opt to resign from medical schemes just because of economic hardship. I think Profmed is strong enough to shoulder and to carry all of those risks on its own balance sheet, given the healthy level of reserves that it has. And this I can safely say also within the context of the contribution increase that Profmed plans to announce at this event. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Christoph. I think the reality is that we all need to be prepared for the unpredictable, and depending on what the future looks like, I think we can plan so much, but we always need to have that air of malleability to be able to move with the times and take on those punches where necessary. And I think what's been really valuable about those insights is how the anomalies exist where this thing doesn't necessarily follow the same trends throughout. We saw the cruise ship, we saw the prison story, so really fascinating insights there. Thank you so much, Christoph. With all good broadcasts, we have a commercial break. Well, in this one, before we take a break, just keep remembering to answer those questions. Keep pushing them forward, asking us what your thoughts are, commenting, engaging. Also, remember that we have multiple polls. What do you think of the new Profmed brand? You'll be able to see the new TVC shortly, which we'd like you to comment on. But this is something in a new direction. It's a new evolution for the Profmed brand, which the team is incredibly excited about. So take a listen, take a look, and let us know in the poll what you think. Do you love it? Let us know. See you after the break.
I can't remember the exact moment I fell for numbers. By the time I was 12, my first language was mathematics. I searched for an equation to help me calculate the variables in life, to predict an outcome, Does X equal corporate or startup? Cape Town, Joburg, or overseas? 2 kids or 1? Or do I wait for my doctorate? So many seemingly binary choices. The beauty of it all is that one variable can change the construct of the universe. That variable is you. Profmed, intelligent medical aid for professionals.
Well, there you have it. It's your premiere look at the new Profmed TV commercial, and I think the team has done an absolutely cracking job. I think it drives that humanity. What's really exciting over the years has always been seeing real people in these Profmed commercials. So well done to the team. Let us know in the comments and in the poll what you think, and look out for it on your screens across South Africa over the coming months. You've obviously had the premiere today. So tweet us, Facebook us, let us know what you think of that content, and we look forward to hearing your views. And I think it's really exciting seeing that music, seeing those visuals. It's a really beautiful representation of Profmed and the future professional of where it's going. Up next, it's the slides that we've all been waiting for. It's the impact on the member and the benefits thereof for the year ahead. And to bring you through all of these changes and updates and evolutions, I'd like to welcome Hendrik van den Berg, GM of New Business.
Thanks, Mike. As always, doing a fantastic job. Hello, everybody. So good to have you all with us. It's my job to take you through our 2021 enhancements. And before I do that, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of our distribution partners. Profmed is in a very good space, and part of the journey to and inhabiting that good space is membership growth. Craig will speak to our membership growth in more detail afterwards, but as I said, I'd like to express a heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you, and we will, at a different time, in a different forum, different platform, recognize and celebrate each and every one of our top brokers in the region. All right. Talking about enhancements for 2021, the first point, and a very important one that I would like to make, is that Profmed have been able to implement increases in every single one of our benefits. No benefit decreases at all. You might think that is slightly pedestrian. Let me contextualize what that means. So the challenges that 2020 have brought along, specifically relating to making the bottom lines work, is that we have, as healthcare funders, basically 3 primary tools in the proverbial toolbox. The first one being contribution increases. We all know that the South African household income to debt ratio is inhabiting the danger zone. So we know that our market segments cannot appetite a high contribution increase. The second tool that we have is decreased benefits. You can shave off benefits to ensure that your claims spend is less for the ensuing year, and we have decided not to do that. And then obviously the last tool is reserves. Christoph spoke about healthy reserves that Profmed have. So we are happy that we have been able to find that perfect balance between contribution increases and benefit increases as well. We have done some work in our postnatal home-based nurse visits. Basically what that means is that at 6 weeks, there will be a home-based nurse visit. At the same time, a wellness checkup for mom and for baby, and also the 6-week vaccine will be administered at that time. We've also done some work in our preventative care benefits, specifically on ProPinnacle, ProSecure Plus, and our ProSecure options. Slides are on the screen, guys. I'm not going to be going through every single one of them. I'll give you a second. Given the market segment that we serve, professionals that like to travel, we have also done some innovative work in our international travel benefit limits. We've also rephrased our cataract benefit IF4. Previously was a unilateral procedure, now bilateral, so both lenses can be corrected at the same time. And then in the post-mastectomy prosthesis space, we've also identified a specific need. It is, as is already, a fairly traumatic procedure to go through, and again, Profmed looking to support our members as best we can. Next slide will reflect that we have done some restructuring on our contribution table specifically for the proactive savvy. This idea drives our design philosophy that every single one of our options is designed for a specific portion of the market segment. Now, what we have seen, mainly due to affordability, is families sitting on the incorrect options, and this is just one step in remedying that, if you will. We have increased our benefit limits by 2%, and we have also increased our day-to-day limits on our Proactive Plus option with 500 Rand. The last point I'd like to make is a very important one, guys, that know that many of our members work in the healthcare space, and it's important for us. Craig was alluding to the fact earlier that it's about belonging and owning the scheme. That's exactly what this decision drives. Our tariff for GPs consults will increase by 5%, specialists by 4%, and the Profmed tariff increase 4.5%. And then in conclusion, guys, just a watch this space alert. We're doing some interesting work with our good friends and partners at PPS in the gap space. So watch out for that, maybe third quarter of 2021. And also we've had a really fresh, new, vigilant look at medical savings accounts and doing some interesting, innovative things in that space as well. So watch out for that. That's my 5 cents. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hendrik. I know this is the section that you've all been waiting for, and we are going to share with you what those contribution increases look like. But I thought I'd just reflect for a little while about what Profmed is all about. Something that is a key differentiator for us is the fact that within Profmed, all our members own the medical scheme. Again, you're shareholders in the most wonderful business that, as Mike expressed earlier, has been in existence for more than 61 years now. And so as shareholders, we look to take care of you as the management team and the administrator. We work tirelessly to make sure that we know who our members are and that we can take care of you properly. So some of the other values that we will still hold true is that the scheme will deliver the best service and design services that are relative to the professional. And so in terms of that, we're one of the only schemes that has graduates who man the call center, who can answer those very challenging questions we often get from, whether it be the student lawyer or the lawyer themselves or the senior advocate or even the actuary, all make up what is Profmed. And so it is something to reflect upon that we have the most amazing pool of skills and expertise that make up Profmed. I want you to then go into some of the details. So Hendrik spoke about our membership growth. And so what you will see is the last few years, our incline has actually just increased. So from the 2016 year, you can see the continual growth and success story as members have joined Profmed. 2019 was an immense year. And then in 2020, you'll see that our membership growth has even maintained some of the targets that we've been looking at. And in a year of COVID-19, that just means that everybody has contributed so tremendously to that. Now, membership growth is underlined by the age of the members joining. And so we've had a real low average age that's joining the scheme for the last few years. This is one of the few success stories that we've actually had in the industry. It's Profmed and maybe one other scheme that has grown for more than 13 or 14 years in a row. So membership growth remains one of the crucial spaces in which makes Profmed such a success. I'm also then going to share with you this slide, which is talking a little bit more about the solvency trends of Profmed. Now, this is a forward-looking slide. This is something that the trustees have over the last probably few years, but more specifically over the last few months, battled with in terms of seeing some of the declines in our solvency ratio. And you'll see in our projection from 2021 through to 2024 that we've seen a decline in solvency trend. And that really is because we're anticipating some of the additional high utilization, high utilization is just members are going to hospital a little bit more, they're accessing our benefits, which means that we are more relevant to those members as well. Effectively, it also means that members are paying less than they're actually claiming. So your contributions are in fact less than what is being claimed. And so we've planned carefully into the future how that would be restored then in a 2026 year right on the end here. So back to a solvency ratio of 40%. Few schemes can claim that solvency ratio, but it is, and it denotes the strength of the scheme even through the years of a pandemic like COVID. I'm then going to show you what we always show at the roadshows. This is called the signal slide. And so the signal slide shows you the turquoise dots, which are Profmed's different options, and the vertical axis is the contributions. How much do members contribute versus the horizontal axis, which in fact is the level of benefit. And so you'll actually find that on the far left side, just sitting on that 0.8 or 0.80 is the proactive options. The proactive plus options just a little bit to the right, and then further to the right, ProSecure and ProPinnacle are also indicated. But it really emphasizes, and what we track very carefully is how Profmed's competitiveness is with regards to our key competitors in the marketplace. And so you'll see the others in terms of the key are all scattered in terms of where their benefit options are. So effectively, we're saying that the Profmed options are exceptionally competitive, if not the lowest priced options in the marketplace when it comes to the proactive plans and even on the low end of the ProSecure plans. But we all lie in the same plane of competitiveness. So it is some assurance in terms of that. I then wanted to show you this graph, and if you look carefully, again, Profmed is the turquoise graph. This is the average contribution increases since 2016. So you can see the market is quite clumped together in terms of those average increases. And mostly this is generated through medical inflation. So medical inflation is not CPI, but it usually sits at CPI plus 4%. In a low inflationary environment like we have at the end of 2020, we've seen that 4% actually is more than what we see CPI at. And so it has been a very difficult discussion in terms of coming to the right increase conversation. But I want to assure you that Profmed, compared to the rest of the industry from a percentage increase, is still very competitive. It becomes even more so when you look at this next graph. And this next graph, Profmed now being the bold yellow line, is an indication of the rand value increases over the last 4 years. And so you can see some of the competitors have gone up and down with above 200 Rand a month increases, where Profmed really has averaged between the 100 and 150 Rand mark. Again, just emphasizing that sometimes the percentage increase isn't the right reference point. You also need to look at the Rand increase. And the lesson as well is, on average, the Profmed contributions themselves at the core are lower than the rest of the marketplace. And we've done a lot of work in terms of trying to get that right. So when we look at the pressures that have come through, we've done a lot of work in terms of managing what we spend on providers, so those hospital groups, the pathology groups, all those other associated costs. We're trying our best to manage those down. I can imagine that when we're looking at each of you sitting at home and looking at your own budget going forward, you've seen the pressures of perhaps during 2020 that you've lost huge gaps in income. you might be privileged to still have employment in the same way that you've had before. And so we recognize and acknowledge the pain that the members have gone through. And it really has been important for us as a medical scheme to try and bring those contribution increases as low as possible. But from a Profmed perspective, I can guarantee you the principle is, if you're a shareholder of my business or our business, then what we need to do is make sure the business is sustainable in the future. And so it's that sustainability that drives the decisions around the contribution increases then. So this is the slide that you've all been waiting for, and probably the one that after we share this with you, many of you will go and do some numbers. So the average increase for Profmed, the weighted average increase across all our plans is 5.9%. Many of our members, in fact, sit on the lower plans, the Proactive, Proactive Plus, and Pro Secure plans. And so you'll see 5.9% on the Proactive and Proactive Savvy. On the Proactive Plus, there was, as Hendrik indicated earlier, a huge groundswell of members wanting a greater access to a larger day-to-day benefit. And so the additional 500 Rand was put into the day-to-day benefit, and hence a 6.9% increase then on the Proactive Plus plans. Our Pro Pinnacle plans are the most comprehensive in the marketplace, delivering significant access to even the most expensive drugs in the marketplace. And so it does carry a 6.9% increase for 2021. This allows the scheme to be sustainable into the future. While we have benefited from some lower claims this year, there have been other pressures. And I just recall in April, in fact, we lost 116 million Rand when the markets actually tanked. And so it has been a slow journey back to trying to get the scheme more closer to a break-even value. And so we've seen also in the last few months significant COVID-19 related claims coming through, but we've planned for them, and we've planned for next year as well. There are some interesting things that will come through next year, and we hope for things like a vaccine. Certainly that will place financial pressure on the scheme, but that will then be the right benefits for our members to access. And so we look forward to those advancements being concluded. So that's the presentation today, and I hope you will immerse yourself in the content. Obviously, all the content is available on the websites, and I hope you enjoy the new brands. Look at the new skinning of the app. The websites have been updated as well. We hope you enjoy the rest of today, but I'll hand it back to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. And we're seeing all kinds of feeds come through the phone. We're seeing the poll results. We're seeing questions being submitted. And I think that the one thing that really stands out from today is that those of you watching at home or at the office, you're loving the webinar, but you're just missing seeing Hendrik's sparkling personality in real life. I think that's there's actually a poll about your sparkling personality.
I'm sure.
And what I love is how so many of you are sending great praises towards the new look and feel, the new TV commercial. So it's really fantastic to see. And I think I'm going to start off with one question that I have, just because it's obviously the most recent and it's the elephant in the room. So obviously when you're looking at developing cost structures and increases, I mean, we've seen some increases with competitors as low as 3.9%. We've seen some extremes on the side of the scale of like 14 or 15%. So I know it's a really rigorous task, and it's by no means a small feat to actually come up with those numbers, and there's tons of actuaries crunching all those figures. But talk us through the figure and talk us about the apples with apples comparison so that our viewers at home can understand what that increase looks like.
Yeah, there's lots hidden in what is an increase every year, and I think people must look at increases over time. And so that one slide that I showed actually shows you how the different schemes have responded over time to very high increases, and the next year have gone a little bit lower. So what the route of the Board of Trustees has been always to make sure that we have a more sustainable approach. In fact, if we took a lower increase now, that would mean significant pain into the future. And you would have to catch up, and that would mean maybe 2% above what you would have had to take for the next 3 years just to catch up for the low increases. And I think that's the same discussion that's happened throughout the boards of trustees in terms of the medical schemes in the marketplace. And I think they've decided to maybe take a little pain now, but delay it for those future years, where I think the Profmed Board of Trustees have rather approached it in a very consistent way to say our increases might be on the higher edge of the marketplace, but in the long term, we will save the pain that the others will take in the long term. So competitiveness, we still remain competitive with even those increases. And the fact that we haven't reduced the benefits are immense. And when you see low contribution increases, it does mean that you have to look at the benefits a little bit more carefully in the marketplace.
Super. Thank you, Craig. And for those of you at home, you have asked us where they can download some of the presentations or brochures and all the updates thereof. There's actually a link on the bottom right-hand side of your screen where you can access all of today's presentations. You can get all the insights into changes, updates, increases, etc. We also have an interesting, this is one of those ego questions from Lisa. And Lisa wants to know, are we going to be celebrating and announcing our top brokers this year? Lisa? You just got to keep selling, like, because this is the time of year when we have to close those deals, right? But in all seriousness, Hendrik, celebrating our top brokers, what's going to be happening thereof?
Absolutely. I made the point earlier, thanking our brokers, that very important part of our distribution and membership growth. So we will, and it is a bit early, guys. You still need to go out there and do your jobs.
ABC, always be closing.
Always be closing. I'm going to steal that. Thank you.
Yeah, use it in your presence.
But yeah, we will, in a different forum, different platform towards the end of the year, celebrate and recognize our partners. So absolutely, look out for that space.
Super.
Yeah, we had a target pre-COVID. So these are all the ambitions from last year that we thought would happen in 2020. And we had a growth target of about 3,600. And to date, I think we're only 60 people behind that. It's an amazing accomplishment for the brokers and the new business team to be 60 people behind the target in a target that was set pre-COVID, and to have gone through the last few months. It really is an amazing outcome. So there is absolutely a need to celebrate that.
Congrats, everybody. That's an amazing achievement. 60 to go. You know what to do after this webinar. Get on those phones, get on the WhatsApps. Another question.
It's 60 for up until the end of September.
Okay, up until September. So we've got to keep going and shooting the lights out. In terms of Pete has a question, and this is also probably like another elephant in the room, is around NHI. And we're looking at the ways in which, is it still on the cards? Is it still a government objective and agenda? And how do you see this being funded?
Yeah. Great question, because I think you would have seen the different opinions in the marketplace. So some are saying, well, COVID is the reason we need to then have an NHI in the future. And I think it points towards the fact that from a public and a private perspective, we need to partner the objective of improving healthcare for all South Africans. So whether COVID teaches us that we can launch, I think there's some lessons that it teaches we have to fix first before we get to an NHI future. But the levels of collaboration need to improve still. And we've seen pockets of that happening through the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the Western Cape was the first one to have contracts between public and private facilities so that people could access the right levels of treatment. So at the moment, absolutely, we've learned lots in the COVID pandemic that will probably strengthen the foundation for an NHI future. Whether that will happen sooner rather than later, I think is still a question that remains unanswered.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the Profmed positioning and all about the humanness. Like we've learnt in COVID-19 lockdown is that we actually have to collaborate. It can't be us versus them, government versus public. We all have to work together and strive to achieve results. And I think that's, talking back to Moose's presentation, it's all around, solving needs that are uniquely African, that are uniquely South African, and how we transform accordingly to make those solutions and come to those solves.
And that means that NHI still remains a blueprint very much in working. Lots of work needs to go into it before it can be a success in the future.
Definitely. Then carrying on with the discussion around COVID-19, what has the infection rate been like for the Profmed membership base in particular, given that many of our Profmed members are healthcare professionals?
Yeah, so remember there's 40% of our members are still doctors and specialists. I mean, that's an amazing stat. And so they've been right in the front line of taking care of South Africans. And so we expected a greater infection rate because of that, and we've seen that come through. So in fact, we've had just over 11,000 COVID tests, but only 1,300 who tested positive. In the mortality side, we had 50 members pass away during the peaks of the COVID pandemic until now. And so we watch it very carefully and manage that quite carefully. So we do have a higher ratio compared to the other schemes in the marketplace, but there's very specific reasons because of who our members are. And I think we need to celebrate who our members are. They're the ones that have been courageous in the front line, helping others, while I think many of us are able to sit in the back and watch what they're doing and really appreciate what they're doing.
Here's an interesting one. Will vaccination for members be compulsory when the time arrives?
That's another very interesting question. I think, so who would not want a vaccine if it works? And when it does work, I think all our members should have access to the vaccine. I think the difficult thing, and it's a typical scheme conversation, is what is the cost? How do we distribute that? How long does the vaccine last? And those are the answers I think we're going to see emerge in the next few months. But absolutely, we need to make sure that our members get the right vaccine and that they get access to that.
Super. Gents, it's been an absolute pleasure. In terms of the next steps for the webinar, we're basically going to show the brand TVC or the actual positioning again. And then from there, we're going to still hang around for a little bit of an additional Q&A so that people have the opportunity to ask questions almost privately, because we know that sometimes people are shy on these road shows. So give them an opportunity to actually send through last questions, join us for maybe another 5 to 10 minutes. But let's see what people have to say. Let's see what the final numbers are looking like from the poll, from the questions below. So here you are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the close to 500 of you that joined us today. I think we've never seen numbers like that in the real world. Amazing. So here we are, traversing the digital universe to bring 500 of you to our screens today. Once again, the link at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, download brochures, download updates, comment, polls, all that kind of stuff. And then keep an eye out for the new TVC across your TV channels that you're engaging with across South Africa. And feel free to tweet us, Facebook us, let us know what you think. Take those screen grabs. Maybe I'll convince these guys to hand out some prizes if you tweet about how amazing the TVC is. So thanks a lot. We'll be sticking around for a few more minutes. Chat to you after the break.
Today, we write the world of tomorrow. Leveraging 60 years of experience while spearheading the new. A delicate dance of wisdom and foresight, we are paving and pioneering the road that lies ahead. Sharing a vision, an entrepreneurial spirit, and solutionist way of life. Our purpose is defined in the professionals we serve. An intelligent partner when you need us most. Investing time to design, build, and create value. We meet at the intersection of innovation and science, creativity and analytics. Together, we are that collective of professionals who dream, who challenge the norms and achieve the extraordinary. So let's keep leading the way, expanding our journey, lighting the path, with the peace of mind that your well-being is covered by a professional just like you, who shares your values, your investment, and your commitment to deliver every day with tomorrow imagined. We are Profmed, intelligent medical aid for professionals.
Welcome back, everybody. It seems like there's close to 400 of you still sticking around, so I don't have to be like the lecturer who has the last stragglers in the actual university hall coming back asking final questions. But we do have a couple more lined up, so keep sending them through. Keep commenting on the polls. Keep sending us your thoughts and insights. Here's an interesting one about working from home and lockdown in particular. So how has the lockdown and working from home impacted Profmed's ability to provide the service Profmed members have come to expect? Have you guys been doing your job? Have you been figuring out new channels and new ways to engage?
Yeah, that's always an interesting one, hey? We've actually had our customer services survey go out during lockdown because we wanted to measure that exact point. We wanted to see if there were any lapses in the service experience of each of our members. And so we got some really good results from that. I think one thing we've always struggled with people working from home is maybe the quality of the sound. And so we realize that sometimes the bandwidth of the individual of where they are, but we've looked very carefully at improving even that in terms of the service experience of our members. And so
we need an airplane mode for hardy-dars because
do.
they're always the ones that interrupt my
Zooms and hardy-dars.
And toddlers.
The neighbours' dogs.
But that has been amazing. It actually, I always appreciate the fact that when we have digital engagements, we're seeing more of where people actually live, their family situation. I mean, that's really great to see.
That's it. You've invited me into your home more times during lockdown than you have in real life.
Absolutely.
So it's been amazing.
Yeah.
I can just maybe add on that quickly. So from a distribution perspective, I was very worried about business process because obviously new business is a very personal thing. That was the first element. And the second element is our interaction with our administrators, specifically relating to new business, is extremely important. We rely on them. And what we found was during lockdown, obviously we made the investment, sent everybody home with all the tools that they needed, was that our business processes actually improved. And I try and understand things, and apparently when they're in the office, they are distracted. They go to the coffee machine and we talk golf and all kinds of other stuffs. Whereas, so it's been good. Just echoing what Craig's been saying, there were a couple of challenges, but none that we were not able to address very, very quickly.
Perhaps on the question about how it's affected our members, we also did the stress survey recently. And so the interesting fact on the feedback from almost 1,300 members was that 45% of members felt more stressed in terms of their working environment. And when we look at it, it's probably those that had to work overtime in the front line during the pandemic or catch up. Catch-up hours are difficult. And perhaps somebody who works from home and they're surrounded by a very busy family creates a different level of stress and different work-life balance problem that comes through. There were, however, almost 30% that said they loved working from home, that they experienced less stress because they were able to work from home. And maybe that's because they don't have to face the traffic and all the other things.
Line manager.
And perhaps not face-to-face. They could be a little bit more who they are. So it is interesting to see that dynamic. But one thing that we've been trying to emphasize for our members is that we've opened up the telemedicine channels so that they can access care when they need it most. So if you go to a doctor, we're saying call ahead of time, see if he's on a virtual channel, and see if you can actually access care virtually. If not, make the pre-arrangements to actually see and get care, especially those that sit with higher levels of risk. They're the ones that must manage their risk carefully or their illness that they have, their chronic illness.
Well, it's such an interesting one about stress. I was speaking to Christoph about it in our discussion, and I read an article in the New York Times about how there have been less prem babies during lockdown. And that was like obviously a focus on the US because of it being the New York Times. But he said that there was a lot of similarities in our market, like less premature babies, less neonatals, all that kind of stuff.
Less Caesarean rates,
yeah,
which has been positive as well.
So quite a fascinating set of data and modelling, whether you are an actuary or a regular member of the
2020
public.
is going to teach us more than the last 10 years have about how our benefits work and how they don't work, and how we need to still be adapting and changing to make sure that they're more relevant in a future world where maybe the digital channels continue in terms of even how people access care.
Definitely. And just to reiterate once again, if you're looking for any kind of updates or information around today's presentations, the brochures, where we're at in terms of our updates, our increases, etc., there's still a link on the bottom right-hand side of the screen where you can download all of this information. And once again, we're always open to your questions, your suggestions. You can submit it via the questions on this actual webinar, or if there's something that pops into your mind afterwards, send us a tweet, send us a Facebook post, and let us know what you're thinking about both today's conversations, our new brand look and feel, our TV commercial, or if there's just anything that's been burning through your skull during lockdown, just let us know what your thoughts are. Based on the membership, what impact have you seen on professional incomes, and how is Profmed catering to these members with declining income in these times. Another, it's an uncomfortable one, but it's a reality. Like you said in your presentation, there's a lot of people going through highs and lows. Some people have benefited, some people have been in poorer circumstances. So I think that's always the balancing act, right? So where are you at as a business in terms of considering those professionals who've had such a profound impact on their livelihoods and their lives?
Many of our members are engineers and even specialists, architects, that where the business has just dried up. They've had no income since April and only starting to kick back in August. We see the levels of income come back. What we have done is we've put a mechanism in place for people to signal to us and say that they're experiencing difficulty. The worst thing that you want to have during this pandemic is to lose a membership of a medical scheme. So in fact, our retention rates are pretty good, but the Board of Trustees right at the start of the pandemic has actually acknowledged that this is the difficulty we see our members going through. And so we've allowed members to be on what we call 90-day suspension periods, which means that they can't get their claims necessarily paid, but that they don't lose their membership. And as soon as the income starts coming back, we make arrangements with them in terms of paying off any arrears, but then certainly we can cover their claims and they can keep their membership without having to incur any penalties wanting to get back into Profmed membership status. So there are careful plans in place and mechanisms that we put in place to assist members that have gone through that difficulty. What is surprising is, firstly, how quickly it hit our members at the start, but how quickly it's coming back now. And so we've seen income being restored and people feeling a little bit better about where they are. There's no doubt that in the down periods, people have indebted themselves more. So the bond all of a sudden became maxed out. And so we acknowledge that that's been a context of how we've had to have this conversation about even contribution increases for next year. So we think long term, there's still probably another 18 months of people going through quite significant difficulties in terms of their employment status. But we really ask members to come speak to us, see what we can help with. We can't help all the time because it needs to not disadvantage the whole group of membership. But we do have plans in place to assist.
It talks to the humanness of the brand and everything that's been touched upon in today's webinar. We have time for one last question, and this one you could maybe you can channel one of your economic friends. What will 2021 bring with regards to scheme stability and membership growth, given the state of the economy?
Yeah, that's a great crystal balling question. And I wish I had Christoph here that I could just say, come, Christoph, tell us what's going to happen in 2021. But we've had those conversations. We've looked at 2021 in depth. We do think that membership is going to actually flatten. So we aren't going to have the huge influx of new members in terms of membership growth. I don't want to say that as a negativity. I mean, this year surprised us already. We're hoping that would happen next year. But we really think the economic and livelihoods of individuals have been impacted for the next probably 18 months, as I said before. And so it's something that we're watching very carefully and managing very carefully. So what will 2021 bring? We hope that it brings the vaccine. We hope that we get better handle in knowing how to deal with COVID-19. I don't think it's just going to disappear. And you know, the warnings about fatigue, about not social distancing, people must be aware that at the moment it's more dangerous to be out in the open than it was during lockdown level 5 and even 4. More people get infected still today. More than 1,500 people was the stat yesterday being infected today. And so we encourage our members to still be very aware of what they're doing and doing everything to prevent that they can get infection now. So next year, vaccine, better control over what we see in terms of COVID-19. We've already seen some serious cases within people that have been on ventilation now surviving. The survival rates are immense. And that we didn't see at the start of lockdown. So next year we're looking at even more positive outcomes in terms of keeping people alive and well.
Thank you, Craig. Craig, Hendrik, to Musa, to Christoph, and to the rest of you who've tuned in today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your working from home schedules or your return to office schedules. It's been incredible, and thank you for all the engagement. Thank you for all the comments on the polls. Thank you for your questions. If you have any more, please feel free to send them across on social media. And for one final update, remember the link on your bottom right-hand side of your screen for the downloads to brochures, updates, information, price increases, etc. And feel free to give us a shout if you have any further questions. It's been an awesome day today. Thank you so much. Please remember to visit our website, profmed.coza. And then for all of those past podcasts, futureprofessional.profmed.coza for anything that you may have missed. There's a wealth of and a dearth of content at your disposal. We're all in this together. We're all fighting different battles on a daily basis. And it's an exciting time for us to be able to be a resilient nation, be a resilient species, and move together and grow together as professionals. So this is me, Mike Sharman, your host, signing off for today's Future Professional webinar. Have an awesome rest of the week.
I can't remember the exact moment I fell for numbers. By the time I was 12, my first language was mathematics. I searched for an equation to help me calculate the variables in life, to predict an outcome. Does X equal corporate or startup? Cape Town, Joburg, or overseas? 2 kids or 1? Or do I wait for my doctorate? So many seemingly binary choices. The beauty of it all is that one variable can change the construct of the universe. That variable is you. Profmed, intelligent medical aid for professionals.